Pressure is a complex sensation. Some crumble under pressure. Others rise to the occasion. Just as its physical nature, applying just enough pressure can fill an object to its maximum capacity, its greatest potential. But too much pressure and it bursts. Everything that was gained is lost in an instant. Today we'll look at how pressure has influenced the Toronto Raptors this trade deadline and how they responded, for better or for worse.
Pressure made diamonds. Only I'm on reach right for time. Yeah, it's what I'm made for. And what your seconds get paid for. Dropped in a coupe, hit the old school shit.
We've established how everyone and everything reacts differently to pressure. Some people are more susceptible, others more resilient. Different objects have different capacities. They're able to absorb more and reap the benefits without being overwhelmed. The same logic can be applied to NBA teams. Some, like Toronto, have nearly reached capacity. This season, for various reasons, may very well be their one last chance. There wasn't much of an option or an alternative. They had to be all in this year. Kawhi's impending free agency leaves little room for patience. And even if you were to completely ignore that factor, the rest of the core group is aging and can only stay competitive for so much longer. But let's rewind to where the story begins. Over the course of the past few seasons, the Toronto Raptors felt that strain of pressure slowly creeping up behind them, with multiple premature playoff exits following promising regular season campaigns, as the window to win with an aging core continued to close. It all culminated on July 18, 2018, when the team finally decided to move in a separate direction with the blockbuster trade for Kawhi Leonard. In a common fashion for teams placed in these situations, the Raptors responded to that pressure by actually raising the stakes with a high-risk move. Rather than alleviating the pressure, they accepted that burden and in fact doubled down. We fast forward to present day and we see the repercussions. Leading up to the final hours prior to the trade deadline, the pressure surrounding the organization had finally reached its ultimate boiling point, with the opportunity to fortify the roster through trade closing, and with two of their greatest in-conference rivals already having made their own sizable improvements, while Boston was making considerable strides in finally figuring out how to make all the pieces work together. The ball was in Toronto's court, and they made their move. Initially, the move comes with an air of excitement to it, and of course they had to do something. I'm not here to discount, discredit, or disapprove of the trade. I like the trade actually. In some regards, I love it. If you limit your sight to just the short term, it's an incredibly enticing move, one that's hard not to bite on given the Raptors stayed at the trade deadline. And any big name acquisition is going to come with some air of excitement to it. And we saw a glimpse of just how effective Gasol can be in that role just the other night, in only his second game with the organization, while still feeling out the new environment, his new teammates, the new culture, the new game plan. After just 2 games, Gasol had already been a part of 25 different lineup combinations, and still he was able to put together a performance that showed you just how important and how impactful he can be to that group. When you think of Marc Gasol, you think intelligence, you think leadership, you think experience. You reminisce on the accolades. The Defensive Player of the Year comes to mind right away, the All-Star selections, All-NBA selections. But how much weight does that name really hold at this point in his career? At 34 years of age, frankly nearing rapid regression into role player status. Far from his days as the best defensive big in the league 5-6 years ago. Far from that franchise-altering status he once held. It may seem like nothing more than a distant memory at this point, with the Memphis Grizzlies having fallen all the way to the bottom of the Western Conference. But no more than a couple of months ago, Memphis stood alone as the number 1 team in the brutally competitive West. And while Mike Conley was their best player, Marc Gasol was the system, similar to the KD-Steph dynamic in Golden State. The team's pace followed Gasol, the elite defense, a product of Gasol. He was the true leader in that regard. But sadly, as much as he was a reason for their early success, he was the reason for their subsequent downfall. And their rise to the top of the Western Conference was equally as impressive as their collapse was disgraceful. And if Gasol is the system, we know that the team's demise starts with his own personal demise. And that's exactly what had happened. To begin the season, Gasol was elite, 34 and not only playing close to his prime self, but low-key an MVP candidate. The way Memphis was utterly outperforming expectations. Over the full month of November, Gasol was a monster on defense, basically single-handedly making Memphis one of the best defensive teams in the league, while putting up prime-level numbers, averaging 20 and 10. And in his first 20 games of the season, Gasol shot 48% from the field, 42% from distance, and scored 18 a game. In his next 20, 37.7% from the field, an abysmal 27.5% from 3, and that scoring output had dropped to only 12 a game. Defensively, he'd gone from elite to remarkably bad. He was always behind plays, his lateral movement was awkward, no longer able to step out and guard the perimeter on screens. Ultimately, he was fatigued. The likely reason for this comes with equally good and bad news. Good in the sense that there was a significant issue to place blame for his poor performance on, but bad in the sense that that very issue showed just how fragile Gasol's body was becoming. You see, on November 27th, ironically in the game against the Toronto Raptors, Gasol suffered an ankle injury, and his huge drop-off in production came thereafter. While I know the very mention of a rolled ankle can trigger PTSD within any longtime Klay Allen fan, if we're gonna try and evaluate this trade, this is something we need to discuss. The numbers speak for themselves. And the fact is that Gasol has always been an injury-prone player, and injuries, and general wear and tear from previous injuries and strain on the body are sure to speed up the regression of any player in their mid-30s, no matter how great they may be. Injuries now become a hell of a lot more significant. The consequential drop-off of even a minor tweak can lead to a hell of a lot more issues for an extended amount of time, as we see here. And it doesn't help that they're bringing him into an organization spearheaded by now 3 injury-prone stars. Kawhi literally just got off back-to-back in minutes restrictions, and Lowry's been battling a nagging back issue all season long. This team is incredibly vulnerable in the playoffs now. One guy going down and that could be it for a 7-game series. In one move, you've not only accentuated the injury concerns with this club, but you've rapidly accelerated that age factor by swapping the 26-year-old Jonas Valanciunas, an important piece of the Raptors' future moving forward. Post Kawhi, even post Lowry, whose contract comes off the books the following season and is himself turning 33 this month. Lowry has been showing massive signs of a decline already. But back to Gasol, the lasting effects of his injury are not entirely his fault at all. Memphis could not have mismanaged his minutes worse, both before and after it occurred, leading Marc to be more susceptible to injury and greatly prolonging his recovery time. Gasol got literally no rest. In fact, the very next game, he played 47 minutes, basically the entire match. By January, he was a ridiculous 9th in the league in minutes played. The only other player at his age in the top 20 being PJ Tucker, a role player with considerably less responsibilities, and the only other 7-footer in the group being the 23-year-old Karl Anthony Towns, who we can't forget was coached at the time by the unrelenting Tom Thibodeau. That should offer some context into Gasol's absurd drop-off following the injury, but it also speaks volumes to his declining level of endurance. The positive aspect to all this is that Toronto does have the personnel to manage his time much more carefully, where he'll be sharing the center duties with Ibaka. But the true judgment of this trade will depend on which Gasol Toronto gets, his early season self or the completely unrecognizable version of himself that came after. The mere 6 games we've seen of him so far is simply not enough. I'm talking a level of performance that's sustained into the long term. We cannot even begin to grade the move until the postseason. Toronto has gone all in, and that means finals or bust. And postseason action means more intensity, higher physicality, longer stretches, less rest. If Gasol holds up through all that, then and only then can we say that this move was a success. Past that, we look to the future. And whether he picks up his $26 million player option for next season, or he waives it and the Raptors end up with just a half-season rental, you're looking at two negative scenarios. Waiving it would mean he expects serious payment for that last long-term contract in his career. And even if the Raptors were to give him that, and don't lose him for nothing, you're then looking at an extremely overpaid player for the next few years. And in the event that Kawhi does walk, that'd prove to be a huge hindrance on their rebuild effort. But aside from that, here's my main issue with the trade. If you're gonna go all in, then go all in. For real. Marc Gasol just simply isn't that. Former co-star Mike Conley would have been. And Toronto was in talks to acquire both, and even tried their hand at guys like AD and Porzingis. And while those two were serious long shots, Conley was a real possibility. A 3-team deal that would have sent Lowry to Utah, Rubio to the Grizzlies, and Conley to the Raptors was close to happening. So realistically, Toronto could have had them both, Marc Gasol and Conley. But the Grizzlies wanted one of the Raptors' young assets in Siakam or Anunoby, and the Raptors refused to part with either of the two. Now going all in, and I mean all the way in, means sacrifice, means risk-taking. Valanciunas, CJ Miles, and DeLon Wright just isn't really that big of a sacrifice. Siakam obviously makes sense. He should be untouchable. Unless we're talking about Anthony Davis, where it's very much debatable. But giving up Anunoby, or at least a couple first rounders, would have been worth it in my eyes, if they truly wanted to go all in. Even if Kawhi did leave with Conley, Gasol, and Siakam as a remaining core, those first rounders are going to be pretty invaluable for the next couple seasons regardless. Someone like Mike Conley or Bradley Beal, that would have been the move. The one that gives you a definitive advantage over in-conference rivals who they're currently still neck and neck with. The one that really proves to Kawhi just how serious you are about winning. Now looking towards the future is especially nerve-wracking when you consider Valanciunas' value. While the Raptors really didn't have to give up much at all, Jonas is still relatively young and extremely productive. And him and his replacement Gasol are just such similar players at this point in their respective careers that the move can seem almost horizontal in some ways. Really the main difference is that Marc Gasol is just a much bigger name. But to be fair, Gasol does have an advantage defensively and as a passer. And don't get me wrong, his leadership, his IQ, his experience is unmatched. And he's ever so slightly the more consistent shooter. But that's the thing, we're talking about incremental improvements here. And he's never been an elite rebounder, where Valanciunas is considerably better. And that hurts considering their other option at the 5 in Ibaka has had his own documented struggles with rebounding against tougher, more physical centers. But to me, the main selling point to Gasol are those extra playmaking abilities out of the 5 position. That's sure to prove crucial in keeping the ball moving and keeping everyone active on a team that struggled heavily with ball movement and falling back into ISO basketball for years and years on end now. That's one issue they've grappled back and forth with for ages and just can't seem to get away from. It's what cost them that series against Cleveland last year, despite seemingly finally getting past it during the regular season. So that's really where I feel like this move could maybe push this team to the next level. And apart from the playmaking and the defense, it's that common presence he provides. Someone to trust in at the end of games. Someone you could slow the game down with when things get out of hand. Just throw him in the post and get an easy bucket in a half-court set. And that'll prove incredibly important in the postseason. I just feel like the Raptors could have gotten more. If this was really their one last shot, then make it worth it. Take a real risk. Throw in an Anunoby. Even if he was supposed to be part of the future, he's been struggling this season, and you don't know if he'll ever truly reach that potential we envisioned he could have after a promising rookie campaign. So it's a risk you're selling low, and it's a risk on losing out on a centerpiece to a potential rebuild if Kawhi does walk. But that's exactly what I mean. That's what going all in is. You have to make those tough decisions. You can't be 1 foot in, 1 foot out. But I understand the mentality. That's just my view. I'd like to know how y'all feel about the whole situation. Let me know in the comments below. Did you like the trade? Were you unsure about it initially, but after seeing how well Gasol fit with the system, you instantly became a fan? Did you like me, think it was a good move overall, but just think they could have done a little bit more, it really is, in the end, up to the Raptors to perform. There's no looking back at this point. Like I said, it's either finals appearance or flat out failure. And while the notion of a title this season is still quite a stretch, at least making the finals in a true battle against Golden State could be enough to convince Kawhi to re-sign and run it back. And depending on how the Warriors' huge upcoming offseason pans out, and how much the Raptors' aging core continues to regress, or how little I should say, they could potentially have a real shot next season. So this trade, like any other, will have to pass the test of time. All we can do is wait and watch, and the answers will naturally fall into place. Alright, with that, if you're new to the channel and you still haven't subscribed, then honestly, what the are you doing? I mean, you're still listening 20 minutes deep into the video, so either y'all enjoyed or y'all really have absolutely nothing better to do with your time. So if you want more NBA content where journalism meets storytelling, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. And for those of you that aren't new, I want to take a moment and thank each and every one of you for the insane support on my last video. I swear y'all are the greatest fans in the game to literally disappear for 6 months and still have all this loyal support waiting, just ready to show that love as soon as I drop. That was such a relief, man. It's such a blessing. Any other channel and people might have just moved right on to the next. And I needed to let y'all know how much that means to me. For those waiting, Part 2 of that next Warriors series is still coming, but I needed to hop on here and give my thoughts about a couple of things before we get into that. So we got one more video like this coming, and then Part 2. So stay tuned for all that. It's been another broadcast from the basketball poet, Clay Allen. I know I'm late as hell, man, with this video. I'm trying to be more consistent, but I'm gonna be honest with y'all. I get caught up in these minor details and I just can't seem to turn a blind eye to them, like OCD type shit. Things most of y'all probably won't even notice in the grand scheme of things. It's a gift and a curse. It's what makes the channel great, but also what holds it back. And I see all of you in the comments that appreciate that style, like all those quality over quantity comments. That's how I feel too. I don't want to ever sell out and just pump out a constant stream of meaningless content for a quick buck. But I do understand that with the speed that the league moves at nowadays and with social media and all that, it's often hard to operate like this. I gotta keep adjusting with the times and updating the video to match whatever narratives are currently prevalent. And a lot of good videos just get lost in that cycle. At a certain point, things just become irrelevant. Anyways, it's a process, and I appreciate y'all sticking with me through it all. And goodbye.